Welcome to First Light, the podcast where we explore the stories of individuals who shine their light, inspire transformation. I'm your host, Chris Keller. Today I'm joined by Brett Schreiber, a distinguished attorney who has dedicated his career to fighting for justice for those who've experienced tragedy and hardship. As a leader in wrongful death, catastrophic personal injury, and environmental litigation, Brett has not only secured justice for his clients, but also made a profound impact through his advocacy and community involvement. Brett's journey from law school to becoming a leader in consumer advocacy and public service is a testament to his resilience and commitment to justice. I'm excited to dive into his story and learn more about what drives his passion for making a difference. So without further ado, we welcome Brett Schreiber. Brett, I want to first start off by thank you for being on First Light today to share your amazing story and all that you've done. So for those of my listeners who may not know you, could you introduce yourself and tell us about yourself?
Sure. First off, Chris, thanks for having me. My name is Brett Schreiber. I have a law firm that is San Diego based called Singleton Schreiber, and we focus on utility caused wildfires, mass torts, and I run the single event serious injury side of the practice, and been very blessed to have a lot of success over the last few years. And I've now expanded into 7 states. Just hired my 75th lawyer and have over 325 staff.
Let's talk about that journey. So tell us what kind of initially drew you to the career in law and kind of where your legal career started.
Sure. So I'm the son of a poor man's lawyer. My dad was a public defender, and some people say that they were born to be a trial lawyer. I was actually born because of a trial. My dad was doing all he did when I was a kid was capital murder defense, and it was in the throes of a trial where he was defending a couple of gentlemen who had allegedly murdered some people. Halfway during the trial, a new court reporter showed up, and he and the prosecutor made a bet as to who could get a date with the new, good-looking court reporter who showed up. And my dad won that bet, and as a result, I am sitting here talking to you.
Wow, unreal. And so where did your legal career start?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I moved out to San Diego. My dad, Florida has, as you probably know, you have an elected public defender and an elected DA or state attorney, as they call it there. And so, he was pretty active in politics. When I was 4, when I was 8, when I was 12, when I was 16, would go out on the campaign trail. My mom actually, when I was about 6 years old, had a pretty catastrophic brain aneurysm. And she survived, but brain surgery in the 1980s was not what it was today, and so she was able to recover, but was never able to work again. And so we went ahead over the course of my childhood. I remember as each election would happen, I fundamentally believed if my dad didn't get reelected, we wouldn't eat. So going out, shaking hands, kissing babies was kind of what I did, right? Every 4 years, asking people to vote for my dad. And as a result of that, he knew a lot of people. And I had certain opportunities, if I had stayed in Florida where I would have been born and bred, to start a practice there. And I'm sure, be fairly successful. The problem with that, from my perspective, was I would have just been seen as Al Schreiber's kid. Nothing wrong with being Al Schreiber's kid, but it wasn't the story that I wanted to write for myself. So I packed up everything I owned in the back of my car with my prom date, my then girlfriend, now wife. Moved out to California with everything we owned in the back of our car, and went to a little known school in San Diego called Thomas Jefferson School of Law. I never heard of it. I remember when they sent me a brochure, I thought maybe it was in Virginia, and it said that at the time, according to U.S. News and World Report, it was the #1 law school in America for students' quality of life. I'm a quality of life guy. It didn't say a lot about their academics. I applied to Berkeley. They overnighted my rejection letter. So I went ahead and applied to this school, got basically a free ride to go to law school. And in many ways, the rest is history. I was working actually in the public defender's office, thinking I might proceed with a career in criminal defense, because it's kind of what I had seen, what I had grown up around. It was ingrained in me at a very early age that killing people to teach people that killing people was wrong doesn't work. And it disproportionately affects poor people and poor people of color. And so that was something I started to pursue. But as I started going through the ranks while I was in law school, I discovered that at a certain point, when you get into the major crimes and major felony divisions, you have to start defending people who have been charged with some really heinous crimes involving women and children. And that was not something that I could zealously advocate for. And I remember talking to my old man about that issue when I was there, and it was interesting. He actually had started out doing drug defense, mostly on drug cases. And then one of the guys in the homicide capital division, one day just had a nervous breakdown, just left on a Friday, never came back. And so they had their Monday morning meeting, and they're like, hey, Bob quit, and he had about 10, 15 first degree murder cases. Anybody want to step up? My old man raised his hands like, I'm in. So he actually leapfrogged that side of the criminal defense practice. And so I talked to him. I said, how'd you avoid it? And I was how? He goes, I didn't have the stomach for it either. And then he also said, listen, if you're looking for justice, you're probably not going to find it in the criminal justice system. And so, if you're looking for somewhere to go, if I'm you and starting over, look on the civil side. And see what you could do to do some good and try to make some money while you're at it. And so I did. And that's where I started. I started with a plaintiff's firm here in San Diego. I had one adult job for 16 years. Got to sit at the feet of some great plaintiff trial lawyers, got to try a ton of cases, which was the singular greatest teaching tool I ever had. Trying my first solo PI case and, very early in my career and just been able to try a bunch of cases. And that was it up until 4 years ago. And me and this guy, Jerry Singleton, thought, maybe we could build something better together.
There's so much to unpack there. I always love, talking to other people to see the parallels because, I grew up as a son of an attorney as well. My dad was on the opposite side of us doing insurance defense work for 40 plus years. I grew up going to court and following him around courtroom to courtroom. And I ended up at the state attorney's office and I started off at the prosecutor's office and then went to, be a plaintiff's attorney. And my first boss said, well, what's your dad going to think? You're on the plaintiff side, you're on this side of it. I say, he's going to ask me two questions. Number one, are you happy? And number two, can you pay your own bills? And
There you go.
if I came off his payroll, so it was amazing. But so let's talk about that journey because I know that you talked about 4 years ago this partnership, but along the way, I'm sure what they don't teach us in law school is how to run and operate a business, and you've grown this amazing business. So let's talk about some of those lessons learned and how you really kind of transition from trying these amazing complex cases, getting these multi-million-dollar verdicts to now also growing a law firm from a few people to hundreds of people. So take us through that journey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I would say I have learned probably more in the practice of law by watching lawyers and finding what not to do than I have been given examples of what to do, right? It's just like trials. I learned way more from the trials that I have lost than the trials that I have won. The wins, I've been fortunate. I've won a bunch. The details, they all start to blur together. The losses, I could tell you every detail about those cases. I could tell you the tie that I was wearing on the day that the verdict came in. But everything else just is kind of a blur. And to that end, the firm that I was with here in San Diego, love these guys and gals, right? They taught me a ton. They built a great platform that allowed me to do a lot of things. And they helped me to hone the craft as a trial lawyer. But I will say, and I've said this to them privately and have shared it publicly, so I don't mind repeating it here in this forum, I also learned a ton on how not to run a business from them. And so when Jerry and I got together, we have been joint venturing wildfire, utility calls wildfire cases since 2007 when San Diego Gas and Electric burned down our neighborhoods. And so that's how we had started to collaborate on cases. And over the years, we, for various reasons that don't really matter, just started working more closely. And we recognized pretty early on when we started this thing that we had a very synergistic worldview, right? And while at that time, my other partners at the firm I had started with, they were all in their mid 70s. I had just turned 40. The next 5 years were going to look very different to all of us. Jerry, on the other hand, was a contemporary, right? A few years older than me. But as we talked about what we saw, as we talked about the career paths that we had, he primarily focused in wildfires and mass tort, also doing some civil rights cases. He's a former federal public defender. And then me handling just a small inventory of high value serious injury cases. We recognized that objectively, we didn't need each other. I could have gone out, started my law firm, done fine, and carried on. Jerry was doing fine with the organization he had and could have continued to grow it. But we saw this opportunity. We saw that if we brought these pieces together, that we had something that could be greater and bigger than either one of us. And so that was the origin story, right? That's the book of Genesis. So in 2020, in the midst of a global pandemic, all of California is locked down. Jerry and I thought and you can't get into court at that point. We thought it was a great opportunity to start a business, which I think speaks volumes about our risk tolerance, right? Which is something, as I'm sure we'll touch on with the business side of this, you have to have a pretty large risk tolerance to you to do this, and certainly to do it, the way we are now, running a 400 plus operation in 7 states on a pure contingent fee basis. There's no hourly money that comes into this place, and thankfully we got some good months, but they ain't all. It's not every month is not Disneyland. We are not just swimming in a Scrooge McDuck gold room on the regular, but on average, it works out okay. But that was where it started, and I had a team of 8, and Jerry had about 40 full time, and then there's another 40 or so that were kind of like temp status, working on a particular couple of projects, and we brought all that together, and we had 96 people by the end of the first year, 175 by the end of the second, over 300 by the end of the third, and we just 14 days ago celebrated our 4-year anniversary, and have a head count now over 400, and like I said, expanded beyond California, into Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Mississippi, Alabama, and Hawaii.
Well, let's talk about the big vision, because I know I share a similar story. We're not nearly as big as you yet, but we started 2019, the year before COVID, and then obviously the next year, like, wow, what just happened? And so faced a lot of the similar struggles, and then the decision to grow, and the decision to expand it really has to be driven by a shared vision. And so talk to us about your all's vision and how that came about and where you see this going now.
Sure. No, and I think you're exactly right, Chris, that there has to be shared vision, right? And one of the things that Jerry and I kept coming back to is, I had dabbled in mass tort at best, but when I had, they were mostly in kind of one-off cases that I saw as potentially kind of trial value type cases. So I wasn't into these large inventories. I wasn't into settlement matrices. If it was a solid case, it was a good case that I would try on its own, then I would take it, even if it was a one-off within a mass tort. And what Jerry and I really, I think, had a lot of shared view on was that the mass tort system, as it currently is constituted, is broken. It is an incredibly attorney-driven model. You have these firms who aggregate cases, they assume these roles in leadership, and what they are then incentivized for is a resolution that increases the common benefit fund, right? And for those who don't know, what happens in a mass tort is a leadership structure gets created, and then the leads, as they're often known, or the steering committee, or whatever the label you want to give it, ultimately tax the entirety of the settlement proceeds. So while they may have a couple hundred individual cases, that's not where they make their money. They make their money on the 5% of the $5 billion fund that is ultimately used to resolve the cases. And what that does is it creates this perversion where now the incentive has nothing to do with the individual cases. That is pushed down. And the incentive that motivates these lawyers so that they can buy another house and another jet and another house in the Caymans is the common fund fees that they create. It's not about the individual, right? We're at the point in the shared ethos that we have that has percolated through the entire organization. As currently constituted, we have over 18,000 cases, 18,000 clients. I remind my people day in and day out, we may have 18,000 cases, but each and every one of them has one, right? And so at my core, like I talked about at the beginning, I'm a single event trial lawyer. And so take the ethos of single event practice and apply it to scale. And that is what we had been doing. And I'll be the first to admit, maybe somebody who's listening to this, we've pissed some people off along the way because we have challenged the status quo of how these cases are handled. They will come to us, as is often the case, hey, we've settled all these cases. According to the settlement matrix of the X and the Y, axes, your case is worth this. I go, bullshit. My case ain't worth that. Your settlement matrix says it is. So we opt out, right? We're forget which judge it was and what Mass Tort referred to us in our group as the respectful dissenters. Respectful dissenters, rebel alliance, coalition of the willing, pick your metaphor. But sometimes the status quo needs to be shaken up a bit, especially when it's not driven by the best interests of the clients. It's driven by the best interests of the lawyers. And so that is really what we have kind of looked to change. And, I'm not a huge fan of this metaphor, but it is kind of like turning the Titanic. I mean, it's going to take some time and you're going to ruffle some feathers and, like I said, piss a few people off, but I'm okay with that. And so that's what we've really done. That's what we've been really intentional about. And as a result, we've been thankfully, incredibly successful with that approach.
I was talking to someone recently in kind of the business coaching world, and she commented on the fact that law firms tend to be 10 to 15 years behind, when it comes to how to run a business and corporations and company and culture and AI and all the things. Law firms tend to always be kind of a step behind. I know your firm is kind of out front, and you guys are kind of leading the way and challenging the status quo. So talk about some of the things that you guys have done to challenge the status quo from how a law firm is ran and operated, because I think what you guys are doing is really impressive.
Well, thank you, first and foremost. And I will say this. One of the things, that if I look back at the book of Genesis, right, when it all began, we were really fortunate that we actually did start this thing during the Great Pause, because it was as a result of that we were able to be really intentional and really kind of stop. I mean, I managed to still actually try a couple of cases each year, even during lockdowns with masks and plexiglass bubbles and, all the things. But it wasn't the same cadence and intensity that we normally are operating on. So it gave us a chance to kind of pause, right? And if the COVID era didn't cause you personally or professionally to pause, right? To think about where you're at, to think about where you're headed, and to potentially pivot, then you missed a great opportunity. And we used it as such. And I had a friend of mine who, shortly before we had started our company, had scaled and grown a tech company that she started with a group of 6 and ran it up to 150. And then some giant tech company came out and bought them out for $1 billion. And I was talking with her about that, and I said, "Well, what was it, right? What are some of that secret sauce that got you there?" And one of the things she told me, which we implemented in year 1, was she said that 65 or 70 people was this fulcrum point where you needed to bring in like a full C-suite, right? A CFO, a CTO, a COO, a CMO, every damn C under the sun. And I thought, that's, I kind of filed that away. And a couple of the guys we brought over early on to run our mass tort operation that had come over from Big Law, they had left one of the giant Big Law firms. And one of the guys who had been the COO of one of the Big Law firms that they were at had gone out and actually created a company that offered fractional C-suite services to law firms. They had never dealt with a plaintiff contingency fee law firm, so they thought we were a bunch of frigging pirates and cowboys. But they understood the business, right? And they understood operations, and they understood those things. And so they were the first ones to kind of come in and help us to evaluate, right, what we were doing. They said their claim to fame was that they were really good at taking B's and turning them into A's, right? If you're a D or an F, I'm sorry, there's nothing we could do for you. You can have all the executives in the world. You suck, and you're not going to be successful. But if you're a B or a C, like a lot of us are, right, you can get to the next level if you have the right people who are spending 40 to 50 plus hours a week singularly focused on ensuring that the trains run on time, right? Because I remember during that first early days, before we even officially launched, I'm back at my house. I got 4 kids. I'm homeschooling out of my living room. I'm in the guest bedroom, which is also my office, which is also my kid's bedroom, and bootstrapping all this. And I am home on a Sunday editing an employee manual. And while I'm doing it, I'm actually Googling the labor code sections that the manual references. This is not the highest and best use of my time, nor am I qualified to even do this work because I'm using Google to even understand what I'm saying. So that's a kind of one of those moments where I was like, wait a second, what am I doing here? And so these folks came in year one. They really helped us to optimize process, optimize our tech, optimize our CRM, optimize our client experience, right? And really helped us in a lot of ways. And then they also helped us to then source, find, and onboard full-time people as we very quickly over the next year or so outgrew a fractional support where we needed full-time, operations and tech and finance people. And I think that's something that a lot of law firms don't do, right? There are a lot of lawyers, and especially on plaintiff side. I think in big law, when you elevate to become the managing partner of insert giant named firm, you no longer practice law. You just ensure the operations and the management of the thing. Our side of the V, people don't do that. We did that very early on, and it was probably, I think, looking back, one of the best decisions we made. But it's an investment, right? And a lot of the other stuff, which I'm happy to talk about, some of the ways we've differentiated our system and our process, is I think it comes down to a pretty fundamental issue. I'm not that greedy. And I say that, I mean, not even sarcastically. I say that because listen, I did not take a vow of poverty to do this work. Okay. And I'm not suggesting that I did. I'm doing fine. But at a certain point, how much do you need? Right. And I, wise man once told me, I don't need to be the richest man in the cemetery. So I wanted to use this as an opportunity to really reinvest. And that's something that we have been perpetually doing. I've always told people I staff based upon the cases I have, not based upon the cases I will have. I also staff not for pleasure, but to avoid pain, right? You do it when you need it. And when you do it that way, then it continues to grow, right? But it's not about running the place like it's a spreadsheet. If personal financial gain and maximizing profit at all costs are your goals, I tell people, in fact, just finished our partnership criteria stuff because I've had, got a number of partners and we needed to kind of refine, what does it mean? So I got younger lawyers coming up. I said in that very document, if personal financial gain and maximizing profit is your end game, then this partnership is not for you. There are places in this world, there are entities in this world that focus exclusively on financial gain and profit. They are called hedge funds. We are not one. So that has been, I think, one of the kind of recurring themes that keeps coming up when we talk about some of the stuff that we do that's a bit different than the average bear. I ain't smarter than anybody. Um, a lot of what we've done is, I think, commonsensical. Again, applying the single event approach at scale, but it requires you to be willing to put a few less shekels in your pocket directly and reinvest it into the greater good.
Yeah, again, the parallels, is understanding that is, look, I there was points in my career I made a lot more money being a lot smaller than I am now, being much larger. But there's some pain points that it's intentional. But that was the thing, is like I always thought I had to do everything, and I had that same experience where I'm sitting there doing an employee manual, and I'm like, what am I doing here? Or doing employee agreements, and it's just like, what am I doing? So that was my first hire. I was like a director of HR. And then getting director of operations, but all the same story, hiring those people, delegating, elevating and delegating really kind of led to the success. Let's talk about, managing 300 something people now, and the culture that you've created at your firm, the things that you guys do there, because I think that's different as well than what we see in typical law firms.
Yeah, no, and just a few of the finer points on that, right? Is just recently, actually, since I spoke to you last, we just recently hired someone, and she's, I think, our customer success manager. I forget what her name is. She doesn't come from a legal background, right? She comes from a consumer background, about which companies outside of law. All she does is look at the consumer, the plaintiff experience from cradle to grave, right? And where can we improve that process? I hired a team several years ago now, 2 years ago, of social workers. One thing that is common, it doesn't matter if it's a mass fire event, it doesn't matter if it's a single event, it's a car accident, some kind of trauma. Invariably, there are four things that happen to people who have traumas foisted upon them. They have medical insecurity, they have housing insecurity, they have food insecurity, they have financial insecurity. Well, who does that for a living? Social workers, not lawyers, not paralegals, right? You ever tried filling out a Social Security disability appeal form? I have. It sucks. I'm not qualified to do it. I didn't do it well. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Social workers do it day in and day out, right? Liaising and accessing government benefits. As I'm talking to you right now, Southern California is on fire, right? We have going to have probably thousands of clients coming out of one or two of these fires that are happening right now in the Los Angeles area. And I am speaking to people, hundreds of people, on a given day. And it's, where can we get food? Where can we get shelter? How do I open up an insurance claim? How do I navigate FEMA, right? I have a team of case assistants, most of whom we've hired. They were former fire victims themselves. They've lived the experience. They understand, right? What is empathy? Empathy means to understand. They understand it at their core. And so having people in those seats, right, to understand and to provide that level of service. Our client services team, there are people here who all they do every day is call clients. This is in addition to our text updates, our letter updates, our email updates. These are people who just are contacting clients. I see that Bob had a shoulder surgery. How'd that go? I saw Muffins the cat was going to the vet. Tell me about that, right? Because here's what we both found. No one has ever complained that their lawyer calls them too much, right? And if you want to breed loyalty, and if you want to have an army of people, it's better than any marketing you could ever do. It's better than any podcast we could ever create. It's better than any ad we could ever put up on Google, is to have an army of thousands of people who say, these guys care. They follow up. They call me. They text me. They keep me updated, right? We have all of these touches. I got 18,000 clients across the firm right now. Every single one of them gets a touch every 3 weeks, no matter what. Just to let them know that you're there. Again, doesn't make me smarter, but it does make me recognize that if you're going to do this well, right? Because that's the whole piece. I think you and I talked about this one other time as we shared our respective origin stories. If we were manufacturing widgets, we would bring in a consultant who would come in and they'd tell you, if you move that sorting bin 4 inches closer to that conveyor belt, you're going to make 11 more widgets an hour. And you're going to be like, well, move that thing, of course, right? Why don't we look for those that same kind of ruthless, review of process improvement in the service industry? People do it in manufacturing all day. Now, it'd be manufacturing malpractice if you didn't. So why are people afraid to take that same approach and shine and kind of look themselves in the mirror and look their firm in the mirror and see, what can I do to be better? What can I do to be more efficient? What can I do to improve the client experience? What kind of investment do I have to make? I can tell you this. If you look on a profit and loss statement, if I ran this place like a spreadsheet, those are expenses. That falls in the overhead column. On paper, it looks like I'm losing money. I cannot point to you. I cannot draw a straight line between the investment in my social work team, my client services team, and all the various, my customer experience manager. I cannot look on a spreadsheet and tell you that makes me more profitable or that generates revenue, but I know both in my heart and in my head that is a truth, because the proof is in the pudding. That's why we have quintupled in size and scope in such a short period of time.
I mean, there's so many lessons in that, and it's amazing. And I would end there, but I got to ask you too, because you did bring up California and the fires, and we know that is relevant in the news now. And one thing I want to talk about is marketing. So what do you guys? I mean, I know you're talking about town halls and being on the phone with all these clients. So talk a little bit about that and touch a little bit about what you guys do for marketing, your brand awareness and recognition, the things that you're kind of doing, especially given what you're facing in California right now.
Sure. And, what we've really done, for, like I said, Singleton and I have been handling fire cases for the better part of 2 decades. Unfortunately, these days, you can't swing a dead cat in California without hitting a fire lawyer, right? Everybody claims to be one, often imitated, never duplicated. So what do I have some ads out? Yes. Do people see those? Of course. But really, we have established ourselves as kind of a leader in this space. I have a lot of lawyers who have come to me already, who have been contacted. Many of them are colleagues and people we know, who they themselves have lost homes, or their house is still standing, but the rest of their block is gone. Right. And so a lot of it has been just very organic as far as that's concerned. These town halls and things that we're doing is the same. But again, from a differentiation standpoint, right, I have a team of retired insurance property casualty adjusters who work for us, who help people with the insurance process, right? For those who don't know, in California, in utility caused wildfire litigation, we only get paid off of the uninsured portion. So someone may have $1 million loss, but they only have $500,000 in insurance. We assist them when necessary to get that $500,000 in insurance, but we only get paid on the delta between their insurance and what we recover from the utility company. And so a lot of what we're doing right now is, and I'm working with a lot of colleagues. I had a Zoom yesterday with 150 lawyers on it, talking to them about how they could help people with their insurance claims. We're working with a couple of nonprofits that educate policyholders. What do these different levels of coverage mean? How do you use them? How do you open a claim? How do you navigate FEMA? Right? So yes, there's a digital component and there's some advertising and some things, but really a lot of this after a fire, put it bluntly, shit goes low tech, right? People are not scrolling Instagram right now when you're in an evacuation shelter, because you're just doom scrolling if you do. So they're not really doing that. If they're checking anything, it's checking the winds, it's checking the weather. But this is about being out there. This is about providing resources. And I will tell you, we're doing that both for folks who were subject to what's called the Eaton fire outside of Pasadena, which was utility caused and will likely be a case. But I'm similarly holding meetings in town halls with folks from the Palisades fire, which was the much larger one in Santa Monica and Malibu area and up through Pacific Palisades. There's most likely not going to be a case for the Palisades victims, at least not a utility caused third-party case. There may be insurance claims and bad faith actions and improper denials and things of that sort. That'll take some time to mature and matriculate. but we're holding town halls to share resources with those folks. Again, I fundamentally believe that if you just go out into the world and you offer assistance to people in their time of need with no expectation of receiving anything in return, that comes back to you. That comes back to you several fold. So you put good out in the world and it will find its way back to your door.
Brett, I can't thank you enough for joining us here on First Light to share your amazing journey. And I know that you're going to do some great things in California with this wildfire, and we'll be praying for and thinking about those that are victims of this fire. So thank you again for all your time.
Here, here, brother. I really appreciate you having me on. It's always nice chatting with you.
All right, Brett, we'll catch up soon, buddy. Thank you so much, Brett. Brett, thank you for sharing your story and insights with us today. Your dedication to justice and your impact on the community are truly inspiring. I know our listeners will walk away motivated to pursue their own calling with greater purpose and resilience. To everyone listening, remember that transformation often begins with one step: showing up, speaking out, and shining your light. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs a little inspiration today. Until next time, keep shining your light.